Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers in the House have already passed a funding bill that is going to prevent a government shutdown later this month, sending the measure to the Senate. Congress faces a February 18th deadline to avoid a lapse in federal funding. The bill approved by the House would keep the government running at current levels through March 11th, and Chuck Schumer said he plans to vote on the spending bill quickly and in time for the February 18th deadline. Congress in recent years has often failed to pass full-year appropriations bills, bouncing between last-minute and short-term legislative efforts to keep the government funding. Lapses in funding can lead to furloughs of federal workers and disruptions in the economy.
We went to Israel. We began our trip in Israel, where we met at the highest level with the Prime Minister, the President, who welcomed us in the grandest style to review the troops and be honored at events. But the really important part were our conversations about our unanimous view within our CODEL of support for the two-state solution.
So as the crisis continues, an extra $200 per month could begin going out to eligible people. Many people have finally agreed to continue sending out a fourth round of checks, and billions of dollars of debt could also be canceled by the federal government this month for people that are financially struggling at this time. And remember, folks, the whole goal of this channel is to provide you with the most up-to-date and reliable stimulus check information. I want to be sure that every member of my community receives the much-needed stimulus checks that everybody needs. So in a recent interview, the House Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticized the Biden administration for inaction on broad student debt relief. The New York Democrat said that student loan cancellation wasn't one of the most single impactful things that President Biden could do. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is demanding that Biden pass an executive order as soon as this month. Ocasio-Cortez said it's entirely within his power to do this, and this really isn't a conversation about providing relief to a small niche group of people. It's very much a keystone action politically, and I think it's a keystone action economically as well. AOC said that Biden's reluctance to issue broad student debt forgiveness might cost him. Roughly 45 million Americans owe $1.7 trillion in student debt. At the end of 2020, student debt represented one of the largest second areas of consumer debt in the country following mortgages. But everybody, let's not forget, it's important to remember that on the 2020 campaign trail, Biden pledged to support cancellation of at least $10,000 in student debt per federal borrower. Since taking office, the Biden administration has called on Congress to draft the measure into a bill for him to sign into law. AOC and several other Democrats have argued that Biden can act on his executive authority to address student debt. Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, two leading advocates for this, have routinely called on Biden to use his power to forgive $50,000 of every student loan borrower. And the plan was proposed by Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, and Ron Wyden to give $200 per month in extra Social Security benefits. The extra income would apply to all Social Security, veterans, and SSI or SSDI beneficiaries.
If I can ask you about Nord Stream 2
Sure.
for a little better understanding of this
Yeah.
right now, can you say, we've seen the sanctions, can you say declaratively that this pipeline will never be operational? This is effectively dead?
Well, we not only did the Chancellor of Germany announce it's not moving forward, we also announced additional sanctions today, and it is not moving forward right now, no.
So would you say, but just for clarity, you say it's not moving forward right now, but there has been some concern among some critics that though he did announce the suspension, that at a later date that Chancellor Scholz could say, yes, we are going to begin the process again. So when you say right now, that means right now. That doesn't mean for perpetuity?
It's currently dead at the bottom of the sea, Peter. I'm not going to get it ahead of where we are in the process. It is not happening. It's not moving forward. It hasn't been operational for some time. So that is where it stands, and this is all the result of diplomatic engagement and leadership by the President and his engagement with Chancellor Scholz.
Let me ask you about some other security issues as best you're able to detail.
Yeah.
There's some things you can't discuss. So without detailing specifics that you can't discuss, what role is the U.S. playing in securing President Zelensky's safety? And does the U.S. bear some responsibility in making sure that he is safe?
I'm not going to detail our conversations or engagements about security with the President of Ukraine, who remains in Kyiv and is continuing to lead the country.
Do we bear some responsibility, though, for making sure, without detailing what you're doing, do we bear some responsibility for making sure that he is safe?
We are going to continue to engage with him privately. I'm not going to detail or speak to it further from here.
Just a last quick question.
Sure.
Is there any circumstance, obviously we're focusing so much on Ukraine as evidenced by these questions, is there any circumstance in which the President would hold his announcement of a Supreme Court pick after February?
No.
Declaratively, it'll happen before that. Has he made a
Yes.
decision yet?
I don't have any updates on that.
I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting. The Democrats began the session with the budget hearing on restoring Congress's power of the purse. Now we're hearing how Democrats want to relinquish Congress's constitutional power of the purse to the executive branch to establish debt levels. This is the topsy-turvy world we've come to expect from the majority. The debt limit is a speed bump that's designed to prompt the Congress to ask what it's doing wrong when we find ourselves spending more than we're taking in revenue. And it has worked repeatedly over the years. The Democrat witnesses who say it's had no effect on budget reforms are simply wrong. The Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985 and its extension, and the pay-go provisions of 1997, and the Pay-As-You-Go Act in 2010, and the Budget Control Act of 2011, they were all enacted as part of the debt ceiling negotiations. Now, it's true the debt limit is not a panacea, but it is a useful tool. And the crux of the problem is that in the last 10 years, while inflation and population have grown a combined 27%, revenues have grown 58%. That is with the Republican tax cuts. Revenues have grown twice as fast as inflation and population combined. The problem is the spending in the same period has grown 89%. And that spending would be even higher, and with it our debt, if it wasn't for the reforms over the years that were enacted because of the debt ceiling discussions. But the Democrats don't even want to have those discussions anymore. They're proceeding on the assumption that the federal government can spend unlimited amounts of money with no consequences. And the problem with that is there are consequences. It turns out all of that free money is very expensive. The fact is, government can't put a dollar into the economy that it first hasn't taken out of the same economy. And there are only three ways to do that: either current taxes, which rob you of your current purchasing power, borrowing, which robs you of your future purchasing power, or printing money, which robs you every time you go shopping by reducing the value of your earnings while it silently hollows out your savings and retirement funds. That's the 7.5% inflation rate that's being caused by these trillions of dollars of free government money. What that means is if you earn $50,000 a year, inflation just took $3,750 from your annual purchasing power. If you've managed to put aside $100,000 for retirement, the December inflation rate just took $7,500 of that. That's the consequence of excessive debt financed by monetary policy. And the crux of the Democrats' argument appears to be that an impasse on the debt limit risks a catastrophic default on our debt payments. You may remember that during the Obama administration, they argued the same thing. I introduced the Full Faith and Credit Act and then the Default Protection Act.